Monsieur le Président du Groupe Mémoire, Dr. Louis, Madame Bienen, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers collègues, c'est un honneur pour moi de faire cette présentation aujourd'hui. Et je vous prie de me pardonner si j'ai parlé en anglais. Dr. André Wienen left the office of the Secretary General of the World Medical Association in 1993, which he had held for 17 years after being the chairperson of the World Medical Association Council before in 1973 to 1975. In his valedictory address, he said, "Medical leaders must be intelligent, but in the first place, they must be brave." I must confess, sitting in the audience as a junior member of the German delegation, I was a bit puzzled by his comment. When he resigned, he told me at one point I would be his successor in the office of the Secretary General of the World Medical Association. It took another decade for this to become true, and two other secretaries were installed following him until I was appointed at the General Assembly in Tokyo 2004 to commence with my job in 2005. Before that, I took my career in the German Medical Association, finally becoming Deputy Secretary General, and from year to year, André's words about leadership became clearer to me. To take leadership is not about being everybody's darling. It is not about to be opportunistic, and it is not always walking on the sunny side. Sometimes acting with conscience means to resist, not to go mainstream, and not to bend. Perhaps it took me so long to understand André's words because I was born into a liberated country. We enjoyed ultimate freedom to speak, to protest, and sometimes it felt that being in opposition to the government was a kind of fashion. What did you need to have brave about? And there was the man who had risked his life for his country, and finally even for the freedom in Europe by fighting oppression and fascism. I got very humbled in stepping in such footprints, and I'm still left with my doubts about my own ability to live up to such high moral standard. André's life is deeply connected to the work and success of the World Medical Association. But let me go back even before André became Dr. Wienen. With the beginning of World War II, a previously existing international medical association, the Association Professionnelle Internationale des Médecins, had practically ceased to exist. Already in July 1945, some medical associations met at the British Medical Association House in London. At that time, the delegates thought it was time to start a new international organization. They didn't want to continue just with the old one. The next year, delegates from already 29 medical associations met in London to prepare for the foundation of such a new organization. Now let me speak a little bit about the foundation of the Nuremberg trials and what it meant for the World Medical Association. The final year of the preparation for the World Medical Association fell together with the doctors' trial in Nuremberg. The verdicts were handed down in August 1945 1949, and 1 month later, the delegates of 43 medical associations met in Paris to inaugurate the association. Technically, the Nuremberg Code is a court opinion of a post-war American military trial. It provided the standards against which the court would judge the physician's conduct in human experimentation. Its similarity with the Declaration of Helsinki, the major guideline on research ethics, which was later produced by the World Medical Association, made many historians in the 70s guess that it must have been that the Nuremberg Code must have been a direct predecessor of the Declaration of Helsinki. However, the Declaration of Helsinki was adopted in 1964, so nearly 2 decades after World War II. And the documents of the World Medical Association in our archive don't give any support to the assumption that the Declaration of Helsinki was developed out of the Code of Nuremberg. But that may be an academical question. To me, the most important effect of the Nuremberg trials was the public knowledge about the abuse of medicine in my own country. The court did not accept the excuses of the Nazi doctors, that there were no international rules regulating experiments, that they were acting on orders, and that it was not prohibited by law and therefore could not be punishable. The court refused to accept those excuses. Instead, it insisted on the individual ethical responsibility. And that, to me, is the key achievement of this trial. Professional ethical duties may be higher than what the law says or what government wants. The revelation about the deprivation of any moral standard had led to a new idea about what international medical associations should do. Other than professional bodies until that time, they were occupied with the self-interest of the profession. The WMA now was founded to develop medical ethics, deontology, the rules of practice. The refusal of the court to accept any excuse of being commanded to do anything and to point to the ultimate individual responsibility as a professional with ethical duties made the core of what WMA is, the guardian of moral professional integrity of physicians. Since its inauguration in 1947, the WMA is a global platform to develop the ethical rules for the work of physicians. We are a physician organization. We take our mandate from physicians for physicians. We don't tell others what they have to do, and we don't want to be told by others what we have to do. This, by the way, is a picture of this group, which in 1947 founded the World Medical Association in Paris. Since its inauguration in 1947, the membership has grown to now 116 national and territorial medical associations. This has been sometimes a difficult history when it was decided that the WMA, the World Medical Association, would not admit state-run health organizations like those from communist countries. Those governments actually had early on prohibited or dissolved democratic physician organizations or prohibited their international engagement. Some of our founding members had to leave the World Medical Association, or they simply vanished when communist governments occurred in their countries. Later, the communist organizations applied for membership in the World Medical Association, but early in the 60s, the World Medical Association decided not to accept membership from state-run organizations or such with mixed professional membership, like for instance the communist health workers' unions in some countries. In other words, the WMA stayed as an organization of the free world countries. This only changed after the end of the communist bloc in 1919. Some of our founding members were re-emerging, some were newly founded as free professional organizations, and we are proud that we now represent more than 9 million, probably more than 10 million physicians around the world. The membership of the association is quite different from country to country. More than half of our member organizations are private associations. A slightly smaller part are statutory bodies such as chambers, orders, or colleges. The chambers and orders do not only represent physicians, but also have regulatory and supervising functions. In both groups, in the private associations and in the statutory organizations, we have some which have trade union functions and others who don't have. Our highest body is our General Assembly, which meets once a year, usually in October. And the General Assembly decides about our policy, our financing. It takes all final decisions for the association. Every half year our council meets. Currently it has 29 councillors who represent 7 regions of the World Medical Association. Between the council sessions, the so-called executive committee meets monthly on demand by video conference to advise the chair of council and the secretary general on pertinent matters. The detailed work of our policy is done by 3 standing committees: the Medical Ethics Committee, the Socio-Medical Affairs Committee, and the Finance and Planning Committee. And we have in this global organization, of course, also a very international leadership coming from all parts of the world. Our current president, Dr. Osaun Enebolele, is from Nigeria. Our president-elect, Dr. Lujain Al-Qutmani, is from Kuwait. Our immediate past president, Dr. Heidi Stensmer, is from Sweden. Our vice chair of council, Dr. Huro Kakuta, is from Japan. And our chairperson, Dr. Frank Ulrich Montgomery, and myself are from Germany. In its initial phase, the WMA was financially supported by a volunteer committee in the United States, with a request to have its office in New York close to the United Nations. Incorporated in 1964, it became legally an American non-for-profit corporation. However, it was evident that of all the UN organizations we work with, the World Health Organization was the most important for us. Naturally, one would say only that its office was in Geneva and not in New York. In 1974, under the leadership of Andre Wienen, the WMA office was moved out of New York, shortly being parked at his office in Brussels, I have been told, and then reinstalled in a little village in France, Ferney-Voltaire, between Geneva and the Jura Mountains. Let me see whether I can use this button. What you see here is the landing strip of the Geneva airport. This is the Geneva inner city here. And on the other side of the airport, there is Ferney-Voltaire. That is the place where our office is located. And it's very close to the office of the World Health Organization or the United Nations here in the UN campus of Geneva. Our office is since then in the direct vicinity of the World Health Organization, which is the UN agency which we work most with. We first were domiciled in a family home and later moved into an office building that a computer company had built shortly before they gave up their business, and you now find us here in these more modern office buildings in Ferney-Voltaire. Now, as the title is about announcing bioethics, to be more precise, the medical ethics as the backbone of our work, but it would be wrong to say that we only have focused strictly on the ethics and that we have seen independent from the social context in which medicine happens. The equal access to care has always been a core concept of our work and activity. In the 70s and 80s, this materialized in criticism on waiting lists and rationing of care. Our understanding has widened, and we now address the social determinants of health altogether. For the last 15 years, we have added a strong engagement on environmental health. We have campaigned and still do so to recognize that basically all climate change has direct effect or indirect effect on health. This comes as a shift in pathologies like tropical diseases moving into moderate climate zones. It comes with droughts and famine, floodings and injuries, or just the incredibly hot summers which we have experienced and which have killed so many people prematurely. We observe new technologies in medicine and how they change our work, whether that is telehealth, mobile health, or now the use of what is called artificial or augmented intelligence. The challenges and opportunities for medicine from technology, social or environmental changes are constantly challenging also our ethical rules. We try not just only to follow those developments, but also to anticipate their effects on how physicians can work in an ethical manner. Although we have policies every year, we revise all policies at least after 2 years. We confirm or update when necessary. We rescind outdated policies. Currently, we have over 200 policies active. Yet, it is fair to say that we are very conservative when it comes to our core values. Looking on some of the historic key policies of the World Medical Association may demonstrate this. The first core policy of the World Medical Association was a renewed version of the Hippocratic Oath in 1948, the so-called Declaration of Geneva. The ancient Greek code was truly no longer applicable, neither in language nor by some of its content. However, the main principles remained in the Declaration of Geneva. 1 year later, the Declaration of Geneva was followed by a first international code of medical ethics. While the first Declaration of Geneva is a pledge, a promise that a physician makes, the international code sets rules which tell me as a physician what I have to do and what I must not do. Both policies have come to age, and in 2017 we revised the Declaration of Geneva, and this was followed by a revised International Code of Medical Ethics, which we have adopted just a month ago at our General Assembly in Berlin. Although the new versions are quite different from their predecessors, the underlying values, the principles, are still the same. And this is also true for the Declaration of Helsinki. I mentioned before that some authors, starting in the 1970s, thought it would be a direct follow-up product of the Nuremberg Code. The Declaration of Helsinki is by far the most known policy of the World Medical Association. It gives guidance to the physician on how to behave when doing experiments with human beings, for instance, when testing new medicines. Internationally, the Declaration of Helsinki has set milestones for patient rights and patient protection far beyond the situation of research or experimentation. The first edition of the Declaration introduced the informed consent as a prerequisite of doing research. Every person has to freely consent to be part of an experiment after he or she has been correctly and as completely as necessary been informed about the risk and the benefits of such research. The version of 1975 introduced the need for a review and permission for each experimental protocol by an ethics committee. Later, the question was addressed how medical care will be continued after the experiments are over, not to have people just as guinea pigs for an experiment and then abandon them. When can placebos be used in research? Which information must be publicized? The Declaration of Helsinki has become the most important document worldwide when it comes to patient protection in research. We don't claim to be the inventors of those measures, but the WMA made them a global standard. With the last revision in 2013, it became also clear that big data, artificial intelligence, offered completely new ways of doing medical research. Certainly, we found that using data instead of doing experiments on patients, this may be less dangerous and would promise completely new findings. But we also found that it may have its own problems and risks. So we decided to have a new guidance on how physicians should work or engage in the use of medical and health data beyond the context of individual treatment. And this brought us to the Declaration of Taipei on ethical considerations regarding health databases and biobanks, which we adopted in 2016. Finally, I would mention a third line of policies which has started also under the leadership of Dr. Wienen. The Declaration of Tokyo from 1975 prohibits the participation of physicians in torture or other inhuman and degrading treatments. Unfortunately, this policy is nowadays as important as it was in 1975. It has led us to a strong engagement for human rights in medicine beyond the question of access to care. We still have to deal with physicians being part of human rights violations, including torture, but we also engage for physicians and patients whose human rights are being violated. During the Pinochet era, Chilean doctors were imprisoned simply because they treated opponents of the regime. André Wienen went to Chile and advocated for their release, with success. He wrote against physicians helping in the executions of prisoners. Certainly, he himself, having experienced the terror by a scrupulous regime, was highly motivated to save others from having a similar fate. But that shaped our way and the engagement for human rights, which is still a very important part of the work of the World Medical Association. And as I said before, unfortunately, this work and this engagement is still necessary. The change over time from 1947 to 2022 can be described as a continuous focus shift to what we call in modern terms patients' advocacy. We see ourselves not as an association restricted only to doctors' rights and our interests, but as conduits for the rights of patients. And from all what I have understood and learned from André, that was his pursuit as well. On the background of multiple abuses in medicine in the 20th century, the Nuremberg doctors' trial was an important incision. Not that it itself changed too much immediately. In many countries, unethical experimentation, degrading and inhuman treatment continued, even in the United States. It has rather shown that responsibility is with every one of us, and that includes us especially as physicians. The final decision of what we do cannot be discharged to a government. And for the sake of our patients, it should not be. However, this understanding of individual responsibility cannot be taken for granted. And it was the last policy that Andre motivated me to propose when in a discussion the argument came up that ethics cannot prohibit something that is legal. Now, Andre and I thought that this was a nonsense idea. We felt that it should be at the heart of the thinking that, of course, good law and ethics go hand in hand. But not all laws are good, and not all government action is well intended or well thought. So we submitted a policy defining the interdependence between law and ethics, but also the limits when it fails. And that means doctors have to engage when they find that laws are unethical or would force them to do unethical things, to engage with politics and to fight against such laws. We still live in a terrible, unjust world with deep inequities, not only but especially in healthcare. The current pandemic has shown this in an extreme way. Not only were poorer countries, especially those of the global south, being deeply disadvantaged in getting access to personal protective equipment, medical products, and vaccines. They also suffered even more than our economies, the economies of the rich countries, if I may speak, coming from one of them, from a long disruption. In those countries, the economies were hit much, much harder. We need more than ever universal health coverage so that people can get treatment when they need it and want it, when they need it, and without getting impoverished by getting treatment. It would be an illusion to believe that the World Medical Association has any power to change this imbalance, but we will not be silent to condemn this injustice and to ask for change. The national egoisms, but also the very limited national abilities to deal with the pandemic, make us demand for change. Universal health coverage is one of the prerequisites for more equitable health care in many countries. We support the proposal by the European Union and some other states to develop a treaty on pandemic. It should help to better prepare for pandemics, to mitigate better and fairer for their consequences, and at its best to prevent one or the other pandemic right in the beginning. And second, it is time to revise the international health regulations. States must make firm commitments to timely action at outbreaks, to truthful reporting, and not withholding information and mutual support. For both endeavors of the World Health Organization, we believe they will be crucial, and therefore we wholeheartedly support them. Now, when Russia invaded the Ukraine for a second time in February this year, the Ukrainians desperately fought back. Our Ukrainian colleagues were faced with a healthcare system that had already been overburdened by the COVID pandemic. They called us for help. At the same time, some of our members called us and said, "What can we do? How can we help?" Together with the Standing Committee of European Doctors, the European Forum of Medical Associations, and some medical associations from the neighboring countries in the west of Ukraine, we started the Ukraine Medical Help Fund. Under the lead of our past president, Dr. Leonid Eidelman from Israel, we collected now close to 3 million euros. We invested in medicines, in materials, mainly to treat the wounded. We helped to replace a maternity clinic with delivering birthing beds, ventilation, and anesthesia equipment. And we are still delivering medicines and medical products to the country. Providing such humanitarian help is new to us, but we thought we had to deliver our solidarity against this attack on our freedom and peace. Let me conclude. Since 1947, medical ethics and medical deontology comprise the core part of our work at the World Medical Association. It is deeply rooted in the belief of individual responsibility for our professional actions. The engagement was never blind to the social environment in which health develops and healthcare is provided, and we act in awareness of the social determinants of health as well as the environmental changes which threaten us. Over the decade, the focus has shifted to patient advocacy in a broad spectrum from access to health to the protection against human rights violations in healthcare. We support the World Health Organization in their aspiration for universal health coverage, the revision of the international health regulations, and to achieve a pandemic treaty. Finally, and personally let me add, that it has been a wonderful privilege to have known André Wienen and his wife, Nicole. To me, André is one of the greatest physicians of the 20th century, and he could have been only doing so with the constant support of his wife. It was a gift to have learned from André and a great privilege to have the opportunity to work with him. Merci pour votre attention.